Debt, everyone's least favorite thing. When you can't afford something, buy it anyway. Just go into debt. And you know those people who are in massive amounts of debt without any hope of ever paying it off? What do we call them? Total losers. Well, guess who the most indebted loser on planet Earth is today?
America, fuck yeah! Coming again to save the motherfucking day, yeah! America, fuck yeah!
At the time of recording this, the national debt is at $36.2 trillion, and there's no end in sight. Just look where the debt is going over the coming decades. To put that into context, the current US GDP is $27 trillion. So just imagine someone going into debt more than the total amount of money spent last year. So what's wrong with America? So how does this all work? Well, when the government needs money for its expenses and it hasn't raised enough revenue, it needs to go out and find it somewhere else. So it issues various debt instruments like savings bonds, which investors then can go out and buy, and then the government has the money on hand for its current expenses. Then, over time, it will pay those investors back plus interest. Those investors can be people, banks, or other countries. There's also a huge amount of savings bonds held in the Federal Reserve, where it will either buy or sell them to the general public in order to control the amount of money in circulation. So who are the creditors for America's $36 trillion? Who owns this place? Let's break down the debt. Right now, $7.3 trillion is owed in intragovernmental debt. That means debt the government owes itself. So the real debt is the debt owed to the public, which is only $29 trillion. $8 trillion is owed to foreign countries. $5 is held in the Federal Reserve. And another $16 trillion is owed to investors, investment firms like banks, etc. Okay, so that's how the current debt is broken down, but how did we rack all that up? The nation has had times where it's had debt problems in the past. It started racking up debt to pay for the Revolutionary War, again to pay for the Civil War, again in World War I, a huge amount in World War II. Notice a trend here? But if you look, they managed to pay it down each time. Well, that changed in the 80s when old man Ronnie came to town and increased, guess what? Military spending, while also cutting taxes for the rich. You know, that genius accounting move where you increase your expenses and decrease your revenue. Wow, what could go wrong with that logic? Americans did start getting pissy about the budget in the 90s, and you briefly saw a third party, called the Reform Party, pop up and start making noise.
Tomorrow night, I'm going to be talking about government reform. It's a long subject. You wouldn't let me finish tonight. If you want to hear it, you get it tomorrow night. But the point is, sorry, just a little silly.
It forced both parties to come together, and they actually balanced the budget. When Bill Clinton left office, the country, shockingly, was operating at a surplus. Great. Now with the country operating at a surplus, did America want to continue paying down its debt? Hell no, we got some extra cash on hand. Let's get someone more like Ronnie back in there to get back to spending. How about another round of tax breaks for the rich? How about a war? Now one war's not enough for you? How about another one? And how about a bailout for Wall Street? You saw the debt continue to balloon under Obama, where Republicans bitched constantly, claiming they were the party of fiscal responsibility, and Mitt Romney famously campaigned with a national debt clock behind him at his rallies in 2012. Well, the party of fiscal responsibility got their chance when this guy came along in 2016, and he added more to the debt than any other president ever has before. And he did it in just 4 years. Well, hey, at least we found something he's number one at. It's almost as if thinking that a guy who bankrupted a casino would know how to balance the budget was pretty fucking stupid. But guess what? He's back. Don't worry, he's gonna have the budget figured out this time because he's brought in backup. Bring in the ketamine addict.
Do you feel like you ever abuse it?
I don't think so. If you use too much ketamine, you can't really get work done. So I have a lot of work.
And hence the Department of Government Efficiency, who are going to find all that waste, fraud, and abuse in our government, promising to take $2 trillion off the current budget. For reference, our current federal budget is $6.75 trillion, and our deficit is $1.8 trillion. So if you took $2 trillion in savings, that would give you a surplus of $200 billion. So let's take a look at the current budget and see where this could come from. 22% goes towards Social Security. 13% for both Medicare and Medicaid, 14% of that goes to net interest on the debt, 13% towards defense, 5% towards veterans benefits, and 20% for other. Now, I need to stress this because this doesn't get talked about a lot. The largest portion of our budget, Social Security, does not add to the national debt. If you've ever bothered to look at your pay stub or your taxes, you will see Social Security is funded with a payroll tax, and that's what pays the benefits. Now, it is true that Social Security is currently operating at a deficit of approximately $100 billion. But that deficit takes from a backup trust fund. And within the next decade, that trust fund could be fully liquidated. And if that happens, benefits would be cut. The amount of the Social Security benefits going out would be reduced. But it does not add to the national debt, contrary to what many of the Republicans are telling you. But anyway, did Doge find $2 trillion in waste, fraud, and abuse? Of course not. Immediately, they walked that back and said they would only be able to find $1 trillion, then $500 billion, then $300 billion. Now they're saying they might be able to find $150 billion. That's a lot less. And what's worse is they're saying that the estimated cuts to the IRS will lead to a loss of revenue of up to $500 billion. They are actively making the situation worse. But hey, at least they got rid of all that waste, fraud, and abuse, huh? Well, let's take a look at some of the wasteful things they've cut. They've gotten rid of the Consumer Financial Bureau, or anti-scam police for Wall Street. They've cut Meals on Wheels, cancer research for kids, flight safety workers, and veterans benefits, including the suicide hotline for vets with PTSD.
Hello, Daniel Caldwell. This is the VA Crisis Response Hotline. We're calling to inform you that your emergency request for in-person counseling for PTSD has been denied. To stop fraud, waste, and abuse, these services will be replaced by VetCare AI, powered by Grok, an X company. President Trump and Doge Chairman Musk, thank you for your service and being part of our efforts to eliminate waste. Have a nice day. Press 1 to repeat this message. Press 2 to return to main menu. Press 3 to leave a message, and an AI operator will call you back if your problem is deemed unwasteful. Goodbye.
I don't know about you, but these sound like the kinds of things the government should be doing. This doesn't sound wasteful. But that's what their goal is, just get rid of as much stuff as possible, doesn't matter what, and use the veil of waste, fraud, and abuse to justify cutting whatever they can. And then they go out and say, hey, we found $20,000 being wasted on DEI, to keep public support up for it. And of course, the Republicans are using this tactic as well, as right now they're moving forward with a bill to make $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid, saying it's to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse. The Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, is even claiming that because the number of people on Medicaid is going up, that's a sign of waste, fraud, and abuse. No, it's not. Medicaid, for those of you who don't know, is health care for disabled and poor people. So if the number of people on Medicaid is going up, that just means there are more people living in poverty. And if you want to reduce the amount of people who need to rely on Medicaid, you would pay them more. And in a time period where companies are posting record profits, that shouldn't be too hard. And then you have vampires like this guy, Chris Sununu, who says that Americans will support getting rid of Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, and raising the retirement age in order to pay off the deficit. No, they fucking won't. First off, again, Social Security does not add to the national debt. They are just trying to use that as an argument to justify getting rid of it. As far as the others go, People who rely on Medicaid or Medicare will likely die without them. People are not going to support dying for this, you monster. Now, of course, there is fraud in our government. There is waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicare and Medicaid. But it's not where you think. It's on the part of the provider. The hospitals submitting fake claims to get unfair reimbursements from the government. One of the largest Medicare fraud scandals in all of history happened in Florida from this man, Rick Scott. You may recognize him. He is now a senator from Florida and one of Trump's closest allies in the Senate, championing getting rid of Medicaid to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. But if you want to look at the largest source of waste, fraud, and abuse in our government, you would start with the Pentagon and our runaway defense budget. Our current military spending is at $850 billion a year. Keep in mind, China, a country that has a population 5 times that of the United States, has a military budget of $300 billion. Our current defense spending is twice that of China and Russia combined. There is no need for that kind of spending. There is no need for that kind of defense because the United States already has the greatest defense the world could offer. 2 giant oceans on either side of the country. That's why there hasn't been a battle here since the Civil War. You don't need to be spending all that money. You don't even need to be spending half that amount of money. And to make matters worse and show you how much we don't need to, the Pentagon has failed 7 consecutive audits. They don't even know where roughly half the money we give them, $400 billion, goes. They don't know where it went. If that doesn't scream to you the waste, fraud, and abuse, and that we need to be taking an axe to our military spending, nothing will. They are proposing to add another $250 billion onto the defense budget. Keep in mind, that's more money going to be spent every single year than we spent in 3 years giving to Ukraine, something that Trump and his allies bitched about constantly that we didn't have the money to give them. But apparently we have more to throw away in the defense budget. Why are they doing this? Because it's a handout to the weapons manufacturers. They get money to make their weapons that never get used, and we have to foot the bill, and it goes up every single year because of that. Speaking of government handouts to rich people, Elon Musk himself gets paid $8 million a day. It seems like the world's richest man shouldn't need that. That seems like waste right there, but yet we keep funneling the taxpayer dollars right over to him. And he's not the only one who gets corporate welfare. Tons of the biggest companies in the world are getting your tax dollars paid directly to them. Not just Tesla, but Amazon, Walmart, Big Pharma, the oil companies get hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies every single year. And if it's true that they need those subsidies in order to stay open, then maybe they deserve to go out of business. That seems like some waste, fraud, and abuse right there, but are they going after that? Of course not. Or how about Trump? Every time he plays golf, it costs the American taxpayer over $3 million. And he primarily plays golf on his own courses. So that money spent is then going directly into his bank account. That seems like abuse right there. But no, of course, we're not going to talk about that one. We're only going to talk about the $20,000 saved from DEI programs. They are not interested in cutting any waste, fraud, and abuse. They are cutting everything but the waste, fraud, and abuse. Okay, so if you want to balance a budget, there are 2 parts to it. It's not just cutting expenses. You also need to raise revenue. But that never, ever even gets mentioned, does it? Why do you think that is? Keep in mind, to pay for World War II, the top marginal tax rate, so the tax rate on the very richest people, was 94%. And right now, we are at a similar level of debt. So it would make sense we would go back to something along those lines to help pay it down. But no, that's not even mentioned. That's apparently too extreme to do the method that would actually work. Instead, guess what they're doing? Another round of tax breaks. They are currently moving forward a bill, Trump and his Republican allies, that would renew his tax cuts and add another $1 trillion in tax cuts onto them, which is expected to increase the debt by $5.5 trillion, and it's nearly all of it's going to the richest people in the world. We're literally trying to give the richest people in the world another $5.5 trillion, primarily your money, and other taxpayers is who's going to have to pay for that. And that's really where all this issue stems from, because infinite tax breaks to the richest people in the world is what has allowed our debt to balloon the way it has. And the argument for giving the richest people in the world tax break after tax break has always been that it's in the best interest for all of us and it's going to trickle down, because the more money you give rich people, they're going to use it to expand business and create jobs, and we're all going to get to take part in the economic prosperity from it all. For those of you who believe that, I need to ask this in the nicest way I know how. Are you fucking retarded? No ultra-rich person who you give more money to is going to use it for the good for anybody. Once you get to a certain point of wealth, it is no longer worth it to keep scaling a business. There might not even be room to scale the business. There may now be more room for growth. Do you know where the best place to put that money is? In the stock market. And the more money you give them, that just means they're going to dump more into the stock market. In fact, it's so egregious that fewer and fewer CEOs even get paid in salaries anymore. They get paid in shares of stock. And when a company has their profits at the end of the day, what does it do with them? Does it use that to scale the business? No. Does it give the employees a raise that, since they made the profit, they did all the work, they should get a piece of the profit? No, they don't get that. So what does the company do with that profit? They use it to buy shares of the company's stock, called stock buybacks, where a company buys shares of its own stock to pump up the value of it for its shareholders' behalf. And the more tax breaks you give these places, that's where that extra money's gonna go. It ain't gonna go to create any jobs or help anybody else out. It's just gonna go to buy more shares of stock. And then the beauty of having all your money, your billions and billions of dollars of wealth in the stock market, is it can grow tax-free, because you only pay the capital gains tax when you take your money out. And if you're smart and you know how to rig the system, you don't even have to pay the money then. Because when they need to buy something, what they'll do is, instead of liquidating their shares of stock, they will go to a bank and take out a loan and give the bank, as collateral for the loan, shares of stock. And as long as those shares of stock keep going up over time, the bank has no interest in calling the loan, because the stock is more valuable than the cash. And then said rich dude has his billions of dollars to spend, and he got it all completely tax-free. This is how guys like Jeff Bezos, the second richest man on the planet, haven't paid a penny in income tax in the last decade. If you actually wanted to balance the budget, if you actually cared about having a balanced budget and paying off the national debt, closing those kinds of loopholes would probably be the very first thing you would do. But are we even talking about doing that? No. We're not even talking about it at all. So if you aren't interested in raising taxes to get extra revenue, what else is there? Well, they got a plan for that. It's called tariffs. Okay, let's quickly go over how tariffs work. A tariff is a tax. When somebody buys something from another country and there is a tariff on foreign countries' goods, the purchaser pays the tax or the penalty or the tariff in order to buy said good. China, or whoever the foreign country is, does not pay. China is not paying for the tariffs. You, the American, is paying. Let's say because they put 145% tariff on Chinese goods, you spend $100 on something that was made from China. You would spend $100 to the manufacturer in China to buy said good, and then you would have to spend an additional $145 paid to Uncle Sam for the tariff. That is how tariffs work. China does not pay. You have to pay. So this is a way to make everybody in the country pay additional taxes. It's like a sales tax. So let's all map this all out. They're increasing our defense spending, increasing the deficit even more, and you're the one who's going to have to pay for it all with the stupid bullshit tariffs. Sounds like the kind of logic you would get from these two clowns. And unfortunately, way too many Americans are in support of these tariffs because they say China needs to pay for stealing the manufacturing jobs. As if China came to America, tore the factory out of the ground, and carried it back to China with them. They did not steal any jobs. The manufacturing jobs left because the economic system we live and die by here in this country called capitalism said so. The profits were greater there, so they left. And that's all capitalism cares about. And the reason people buy foreign goods over American-made goods is because they are better or they are cheaper. That's also what capitalism preaches. Whoever builds the best product for the cheapest price is going to get all the business. And whoever can't goes and stands in the unemployment line. That's the hallmark trait of capitalism. That is the system that we scream and love every day here in America, that we swear is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But now, because American companies are on the wrong side of it all, now we want Uncle Sam to step in and intervene at the expense of the taxpayer. Oh. You would think that in a country that preaches capitalism as the greatest thing in the history of humanity would support going by the rules of capitalism. And if you want people to buy the American products, it's simple. Build better ones or go under. But we can't let that happen to American companies, so we want Uncle Sam to intervene. For an example, because we were talking about Doge, let's look at Tesla. Despite how much Musk hypes up his ugly ass cars, it is far from the greatest electric car built on this planet. That title belongs to the BYD, a Chinese electric car. It's better than a Tesla in every way. It has more sales worldwide. It takes less time to recharge than it does to fill up at the pump for a normal car. And get this, it's also cheaper than a Tesla. So you're probably asking, why would anyone in the world buy a Tesla over a BYD? Good question. They wouldn't. So that's where you come along with the tariffs. You put 145% tariff on Chinese goods. Now all of a sudden, people aren't going to buy it. And they're going to have to take their shitty Tesla instead. That's the purpose of the tariffs, to save people like Musk and their shitty companies and punish Americans by not letting them have the better product not letting them choose if they want to buy a cheaper, better product, and instead force them to have the shitty, more expensive product. Everyone else on the planet gets nicer, cheaper things, but you're an American, so you get to pay more for a much shittier product. That's the American dream right there. And before anybody comes at me and says, well, what about those workers? It's an American company. These guys do not care at all about workers. This is a guy who laughed about letting go entire branches of workers because they threatened to unionize, and Trump hailed him for it.
I mean, I look at what you do. You walk in and you just say, you want to quit? They go on strike. I won't mention the name of the company, but they go on strike and you say, that's okay, you're all gone. You're all gone. So every one of you is gone, and you are the greatest. You would be very good. Oh, you would love it.
In case you didn't hear that well enough the first time, I'm going to play that again to stress how much those two, Trump and Musk, care about American workers.
I mean, I look at what you do. You walk in and you just say, you want to quit? They go on strike. I won't mention the name of the company, but they go on strike and you say, that's okay, you're all gone.
And if you want to make the claim that the government at times needs to step in to help out everyday Americans, okay, that's fine. But there are about 10,000 other things higher priority that the government should be helping Americans with over continuing to produce shitty cars. Okay, so the future for America is looking pretty dim, so let's fix it. Let's get rid of the real waste, fraud, and abuse. No more golf for Trump. That saves the taxpayer $100 million a year. And no more welfare for the other president. In fact, no more welfare for any of these giant companies. Tesla can fuck off. Amazon can fuck off. Walmart can fuck off. The oil companies can fuck off. That, in all, will save us over $200 billion a year. Next, I want to default on a small portion of our debt that's owed to the high-income investors. That can save us another $100 billion a year. Also, I want to go after the real waste, fraud, and abuse in our government, the fucking Pentagon. I'm going to cut it in half, saving $425 billion a year. Now, I want to actually fix our tax system and go after these guys who are cheating on their taxes. It's estimated that about $1 trillion of revenue is lost each year in tax revenue from people cheating on their taxes. And the reason they can get away with it is because the IRS has been so underfunded. The more money you give to the IRS, you're going to get a multiple about tenfold back. So let's fund the IRS and get as much of that missing as we can. Since we're operating with an estimate of $1 trillion in tax cheating every year, I want to say I can get about half of that back, $500 billion. So I'll fund the IRS for another $50 billion, giving us another $500 billion in revenue for a net gain of $450 billion. Then I want to let the Trump tax cuts expire. That'll save another $400 billion. And I want to repeal what's left of the Bush tax cuts for high-income individuals. That means people who make over $250,000 a year. That brings in another $125 billion. What else could we do? Well, we'll do something called a wealth tax. That is a tax on the money you already have for people who have a net worth of over $50 million. 2% tax on your wealth of over $50 million, and if you're a billionaire, it goes up to 3%. That wealth tax would bring in another $400 billion a year. Now, all of a sudden, we're operating with a $300 billion surplus. But I don't want to stop there. We talked about Social Security earlier. Again, Social Security does not add to the national debt, but the trust fund is going to run out within the next decade. So let's fix that. The reason it's going to run out is because it's being underfunded. There, as I mentioned earlier, you pay for Social Security with a payroll tax of 6.2%. But that 6.2% only applies to your first $168,000 of income earned. Any amount you earn over $168,000, you don't have to pay a Social Security payroll tax on. That's fucking stupid. Instead of having all that, let's just take the cap off. No matter how much you make, you pay 6.2%. It's called a flat tax, and Republicans used to be in favor of that. So we'll have that here for Social Security. You take the top off and make everyone pay 6.2%, all of a sudden it's saved and there's no risk of it ever running out. But I don't want to be done right there. I want to continue and look at healthcare. Right now, the federal government spends a little over $1 trillion each year on Medicare. And on Medicaid, while the budget is $900 billion, only about little over 70% of that is the federal government. The rest is paid by the states. So it's about $650 billion being paid by Medicaid. So if we combine the two of them, that'll be about $1.65 trillion in spending towards those two programs from the federal government. And I'm with Republicans. Let's get rid of them. But instead of just telling everyone to go die on the streets, I want to do what everyone else in the world has figured out, and that has to have a single-payer healthcare program. If you're an American citizen, you're automatically enrolled in the program. No deductibles, no premiums, no out-of-pocket expenses, none of this out-of-network provider bullshit. You're covered. That's what everyone else in the world has figured out, except for America. And we're told the reason we can't have it here is we don't have the money for it. Despite being the richest country in the world, we somehow are the one that can't afford to do so. Well, let's take a look at that. Right now, the current spending on healthcare in the US last year, when you take into account Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance, and uninsured, is around $4.5 trillion. If you had a single payer system, that is to remove the profit motive from the insurance companies and all the bullshit that they bring, it would save $500 billion a year. So the cost is really $4 trillion to have a single payer program. Then if you look between our cuts of Medicare and Medicaid and our $300 billion surplus, we have almost $2 trillion of surplus that we can put towards this. Now all of a sudden, we got to find only $2 trillion to pay for the rest of the program. Where else can we look? Well, let's look at drug prices. If we allowed the negotiation of drug prices instead of having just to take their price gouged prices, it would save a couple $100 billion a year. But I don't just want to do that. Instead of having big pharma bullshit, axe it, get rid of it. It's funded with taxpayer money already. We give so much taxpayer money to fuel the production of new drugs and research. It should not be a private industry. Make it a national program, because we're already funding it. It makes sense. Then remove the profit motive entirely when selling to Americans, but other countries that buy our drugs, which they already do, and they still pay less than us, we would charge a slight profit on those, so you'd bring money back. All in all, that would save or generate in revenue $400 billion. That would make sense to me. Now all of a sudden, we have a $1.6 trillion we got to come up with. Then I want to turn to the payroll tax that pays for Medicare right now. It's at 1.45%. I want to increase it from 1.45 to 3.8%. That means everyone pays 6.2 for Social Security and 3.8 for Medicare for a total of 10% in payroll taxes. That extra increase would bring in another $350 billion annually. But I don't just want to stop there. Right now, employers, because they have to provide private insurance to their employees, spend about $1.2 trillion on that. In this new system, they wouldn't need to do that. So I want to put a 7.6%, which is twice of 3.8, onto all employers to pay for said program. All in all, that would bring in roughly $1 trillion, which means they would save $200 billion on the part of the employer. Now, maybe they could afford to give a raise to their employees. Now, all of a sudden, the expense for our last bit of our health insurance program would be about $250 billion. And there are tons of ways to come up with that money. You could raise taxes on the rich. You could close other loopholes they're using. You could start taxing capital gains and tax unrealized capital gains on high-income earners. There are several things you could do, but let's say we want to be nice to the rich people for once, because we never do that. But let's say we want to give them a break and we want to find another way to come up with that last couple $100 billion. What could we do? Anyone have an idea?
Children are so fat today. Isn't there some way we can make money off that?
Yeah, that's a great idea. We'll call it a fat tax. This country eats so much shit. Let's put a sales tax on all of said shit. On the junk food, on the fast food, on the red meat, on the soda, and on the booze. That would bring in several $100 billion. Wow, perfect. And it makes sense. Because those of us who eat like absolute shit are gonna live unhealthier lives. And if you're living an unhealthier life, eventually you're gonna have to go to the doctor more and have higher medical bills. So it makes sense of putting the tax on said things that give them higher medical expenses and have the people who eat like shit and have higher medical expenses pay a little more into the system. So the McDonald's French fries will cost about a quarter more and everyone gets free healthcare. Sounds like a deal to me. And just for reference, in 2023, the average American spent $13,000 on healthcare when you include everything. So, under this system, you would have to make around over $550,000 in order to not be benefiting from this over the current system. Okay, let's review what we've done today. We balanced our budget. We saved Social Security. We've given everybody a raise. We gave everybody universal health care. And we did it in what, less than half an hour? And what the fuck are our politicians doing all day? Not this. We already showed you what their plan is for you. At some point we have to start asking, who's stupider? The stupid idiots in power? Or the fucking morons who enable them?